right. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Hunting Leases webinar. My name is Avalon Powell. I am the marketing manager for Braun and Gresham, and I'm going to be assisting our presenter, Eric Gomez, with moderating questions during the open Q&A this evening. So this webinar is scheduled for approximately an hour. During this presentation, Eric's going to be discussing property and risk management tools for owners of hunting lease properties. We will be saving time at the end of our presentation to address your questions, but you are welcome to submit those at any time. To do that, you'll need to use the Q&A feature of Zoom. So if you scroll over your Zoom screen, you should see a toolbar that pops up at either the top or the bottom of that screen. And on that toolbar, you should see an option for Q&A. If you click that, it will actually open up a separate pop-up box and you can type your questions directly in. After the webinar, we're going to follow up with an email that has a copy of this presentation's recording, and we'll also provide our contact information if you have any additional follow-up questions. So now, Eric, feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Avalon. And thank you all for attending tonight on this Thursday evening. I'm grateful just to be able to speak with you. This presentation has a catchy title for a reason. We were fortunate to be able to give this presentation recently at the TWA event in San Antonio, and thought that it would be useful, for folks like yourself who weren't able to attend, and just to give you some good tips to think about in terms of leasing out your property. So let's get started. Let's see here. Okay, so who is this guy in front of you? Whoops, a little too aggressive. This guy is aggressive. That's the first point. So who's this guy in front of you? So I own a fishing rod company in addition to being a real estate attorney here at Braun and Gresham. And the great thing about that is it really gives me a passion for the outdoors. I mean, I'm pot committed. Right. I care about hunting. I care about fishing. It has a personal connection with me, a personal connection with my family. And so for me, this isn't just an academic exercise. It's a way of life. It's super important. I'm also a pastor, and I really believe in, stewardship, having this higher calling to be good stewards of the land that we've been entrusted with. That's super meaningful and important. So I feel privileged to get to share this topic with you all, and hope that you're really going to get something out of it. So what are we talking about here? I'm going to have some videos, just so you know. I'm going to have some videos just to keep things interesting. I'm going to start with the first one right here that I hope works. That's a big if. You never know. There, I'm going to refresh it and see if it goes through. Well, shoot.
Yeah, it looks like maybe it's just running slow there, Eric, on the server.
That's okay.
Turkey, only animals smarter than man. What the hell is that? A turkey.
Dad, you slaughtered that poor turkey.
Not if I scare it away with this cougar call.
You did it, Mom.
A cougar! Die, cougar! My leg! Oh, geez. Got that tip right there.
Dad, you shot Mo.
Okay, so let's see, we go back to this presentation here. There we go. So that's an exaggeration, but that's kind of about what we're talking about, right? We're talking about we're hunting, we're talking about leases, we're talking about liability, and we're talking about how you can keep your land with your family and your money in your pocket through some steps that really cost you guys next to nothing. So that's really what we're getting into this evening. And here's our outline, right? Here's the bare bones of how this is going to proceed. So we want to ask the question, why do we lease, right? Why do we lease? We want to ask who's on your land. What's the law, right? What does the law say about your duties and responsibilities? And how can you cover your butt, right? That's really what's important. How can you cover your butt under the law for who's on your land when you're leasing? So let's talk about the big picture, right? The big picture. Land is special. I don't have to tell you all that. Land is special. It's one of the most valuable assets that you can own, probably the most valuable asset. And you know, it has this emotional connections, deep connection, and there's something spiritual about land. There's something spiritual about sharing that with other people and enjoying that, right? And we want to protect that when we're sharing it and enjoying it. And protecting land, there's not a one-stop single solution that's going to fit everybody. Okay, think of it as a brick. One brick by itself, it's sitting there in front of you on the ground, isn't going to do a whole lot. But when you put these bricks together in the right way, you've got a wall, right? You've got a wall, and the wall is what's going to protect you. And that's sort of what we're getting at here tonight. How do we construct this wall, and what does that wall look like? Let's see here. All right. So the first question: why do we lease at all? It's a great question, right? Why should you lease? Well, leasing is business, right? It's big. Deer hunting is big business. It's big business in Texas. You know, there's a lot of people in our state that want to hunt Texas. And not only that, there's a lot of people from outside of our state that want to hunt Texas, and from outside of our country that want to come and hunt Texas, because Texas is a special place. There's a lot of money in that business. And this money helps us to keep up with our land. Right? There's a lot of cost involved with the upkeep of land. There are taxes. You guys know that. There are taxes involved. And leasing out for fees helps you to pay those taxes. Hunting is also a great way to provide education. It's a great way to help people learn how to be self-sufficient, how to teach the younger generation gun responsibility, and care for nature and land. Leasing is also a great way to engage in wildlife management, right? Wildlife, you know, I know at least 2 landowners who have wildlife ag special valuations on their property, and they're not hunters. I don't know if you guys know anybody like that. They're not hunters, but they have this ag exemption on their property. And what's happened is they've created this amazing habitat for deer. And the deer want to come and stay there, and their land is becoming overrun with deer populations, right? So hunting is a way to manage the wildlife so that the deer populations don't become a nuisance. Hunting also allows you to set up to establish connections with people you might not have been able to run into before. I mean, you're getting some salt of the earth, good people coming onto your property from all over the place, and you get to meet and connect with these folks. And hopefully, and that's not all the reasons why we lease, but hopefully, you know, through some of these reasons, you develop a greater appreciation for your own property and what you have and what you get to share with other people. So this brings us to the question of who's on your land. Hopefully not these guys, right? That goes running off screaming into the woods. You know, people come in different shapes and colors and sizes, and you know, there's purple people coming on, there's green people coming on. What I mean by that is there are people who are invitees, and there are people who are licensees, and there's trespassers. And you owe the purple people a different duty than you owe the green people, right? So it's really important to know who's coming on your land. And here's a great example. So an invitee is somebody who's coming onto your property for a mutual benefit. Okay, they're coming on. So these are people. Think of people like paying hunters. So the hunter is paying to come on to use your property. They're getting the benefit of that transaction. You're also benefiting because you're collecting that lease fee. All right. The law says that you owe invitees the highest duty of care. The duty of care to an invitee is that you have to sort of be proactive, right? You have to go out of your way to look for dangerous conditions and to warn the people who are coming onto your property about those conditions. Okay. The law says that if there's a dangerous condition that you're aware of, or that you should have been aware of, right, you could be liable if something happens to the invitees coming on your property. Licensee is very similar, right? Licensees are people who are coming onto your property, but they're gaining the benefit. It's sort of a one-way street. So think of family and friends, right? You're not really collecting a monetary benefit for them coming on your property. Sure, you might get something visceral or something emotional out of it, but in terms of the law, you're not really gaining, right? They're gaining by getting to experience your property, hunt on it. Well, the law says you still owe them a duty of care and responsibility, but that duty of care is really limited to what you know about your property, not what you should be aware of. So if you know that there is a dangerous condition on your property, you need to do something about that. Okay, trespassers are their own thing. You might have some preconceptions about what you can and can't do to a trespasser. Some of them are probably right, some of them are probably wrong. Suffice it to say, you don't really owe them a duty of care, but you can't intentionally harm them. Okay, now that gets a little bit into the Texas Penal Code and stuff like that, which is beyond the scope of this presentation. But just suffice it to say for hunting leases that you can't really go out of your way to harm a trespasser, right? And you've got to avoid grossly negligent conditions on your property. Eric, what the heck does that mean, right? Grossly negligent condition is something like you have a down power line, right? There are power lines running over your property. There are lines that are just laying there on the ground sparking, right? If a trespasser comes onto your property and trips over one of those and gets electrocuted, you're going to be in a bit of a pickle, all right? So this is the kind of stuff we're talking about. Okay, so responsibility starts with the law, right? And I got another quick video here. We'll see if YouTube is happy with me or not. Come on. Maybe not. Angry YouTube. Try this just for a couple seconds.
Look, I know I don't have any proof, but this woman is trying to kill me.
Fine. Let me tell you what I tell everybody who comes in here. The law is powerless to help you.
Do I have to be dead before you'll help me?
Well, not dead, dying. No, don't walk away. But how about this? Just show me the knife in your back. Not too deep, but it should be able to stand by itself.
Okay, so fortunately, the law the law isn't that bad, right? It's a little bit more clear. It's a little bit more helpful. So understanding it is super important, right? And I have these verses up here because I really think it captures the fact that the law is important because it lets us know what's right and what's wrong. It lets us know the floor and the ceiling, what our responsibilities and duties are. And it's a tool that we use to seek justice, for some kind of final resolution that we're hoping will come. So let's take a look at what I'm talking about here. And some of these you probably have heard of, some of these you may not have heard of. Okay, and that's okay. The more you hear about it, the more they're going to stick in your mind, and that's kind of what our goal is. So let's talk first about the Texas Recreational Use Statute. And I'm really hoping you heard of this one because it's been on the books since 1965, right? And what the so backing up a little bit, these first two statutes, the Recreational Use Statute and the Agritourism Act, are liability limiting statutes, right? Liability limiting, that means they box in what you are responsible for and tell you what you're not responsible for too, okay? But there are criteria that are involved, boxes you got to check in order to get the benefit of these statutes. So the first one is the Texas Recreational Use Statute. And let's talk about how you qualify under that statute for its benefits, for its liability protection. So you've got to have agricultural land, okay? And agricultural land means land used for crops, for forestry, or for livestock, right? This is what we're talking about, crops, forestry, and livestock. there's got to be a recreational use. Okay, a recreational use is basically any kind of outdoors activity, any kind of outdoor activity that's associated with nature is a recreational activity. So here's a test question. How about, so we know hunting leases, right? That's why this is here. Obviously, hunting leases are gonna make the mark. But what about walking the dogs? Right? What about walking the, like, what if you're an invitee on someone's land and you decide to walk your dogs along the road and you get hurt? Does that qualify? What about riding ATVs on that property? What about bird watching? Or what about sitting on a swing? Let's say you're sitting on a swing, hanging from this beautiful oak tree, and the limb breaks, and you go crashing to the ground and break an arm. Are all of those considered recreational activities? Believe it or not, they are. Right? Isn't that crazy? They are. So you got to expand the possibilities of what could be considered a recreational activity beyond just hunting. Finally, there's also a money component, right? And this, again, this gets a little bit complicated. I'm going to try to keep it simple, and the more times you hear it, the better, right? So again, you need agricultural land, you need recreational use going on that property, and you've got to check one of the money boxes. And the money boxes are like this. You can't be charging a fee for people to come onto your property. Okay, if you're not charging a fee to hunt, and there's hunting going on, it's on your property, it's ag land, you qualify. Good. All right. The second money box you can check is you're charging a fee, but the fees that you're getting on an annual basis are less than 20 times the property taxes you're paying. All right, I'm going to ask you what I just said in 10 minutes and see if you can repeat that. Right? The more you hear this, the better it's going to stick, or at least you might remember something about property taxes and fees. Okay, so if the fees you're collecting are less than 20 times the amount of property taxes that you're paying, you're covered. Okay, or there's a third one, and the final one. If you have sufficient liability insurance, you're covered, right? And you also get a bonus if you have the liability coverage that we'll talk about in a second. But all of those, check one of those money boxes, have a recreational use and agricultural land, and the benefits of the recreational use statute apply. So what are those benefits? So you are protected from all of your quote unquote negligent acts. All right. Negligence is a legal term. You may have heard of it, you may have not, but it's basically you owe a duty of care to somebody. You breach that duty of care. The person was damaged because of your breach, and your breach was a proximate cause of the damages they suffered. Okay, all that to say, negligence. Think of in your mind of stuff you maybe should have been aware of that you weren't. Okay, this is a pretty low bar. Well, if you qualify for under the recreational use statute, there's no liability for negligent acts. Okay, that's a pretty big deal. So we're only looking at grossly negligent stuff, those down power lines. Okay, and you were aware of them, and somebody can prove they sent you an email saying, "Hey, boss, you got some down power lines here," and you just willfully disregard it. Right? That's what we're talking about with gross negligence. You can't intentionally harm somebody. Okay, you can't go run them down with your car. Right? Not that you would do that, but you got to say it. So those are the kinds of things. If the recreational use statute caps or removes your liability for negligent acts. Oh, I just covered this. Okay. Oh, the other one is so protective. It doesn't protect you from attractive nuisances, and this is important. It's so important that I made a separate slide for it that we're going to talk about in a second. But it doesn't protect you from attractive nuisances for kids under 16. Okay, so let's talk about the Texas Agritourism Act. And this one you may not be familiar with because it's only been on the books since 2015. And this is a neat act that is super applicable. So how do you qualify for and let me just tell you that the recreational statute and the Texas Agritourism Act, they overlap. Okay, they overlap like a Venn diagram. All right, and that's okay. You can be protected under both. Yeah, just because you qualify for one doesn't mean you can't qualify for the other. It's just extra protection. So under the Agritourism Act, you need agricultural land. We just talked about that. There needs to be an agritourism activity. All right, that's the same thing as a recreational use. It's just, I guess they call it something different to confuse you, but that's the same thing. And there's no money component. Wow, that's big time, right? There's no money component. You don't have to worry about whether you have sufficient liability insurance, your fees and property tax and all that. It doesn't matter. Agricultural land, agritourism activity. Okay, that's what we're looking at. Sounds pretty good, right? So if you qualify under this, under the Texas Agritourism Act, all of your liability and damages from liability are erased. So this includes negligent acts. This includes some grossly negligent acts. But you know, but there are exceptions, of course. There are exceptions. There are exceptions listed out in the statute that will still find you liable. So here, let me read you the exact statute language. Super short. Otherwise, I wouldn't do this to you guys. So the statute here says, except as provided by Section B, and those are the exceptions, an agritourism entity, that's you guys, is not liable to any person for an agritourism participant injury or damages arising out of the agritourism participant injury, right? If the agricultural land and agritourism activity, if you do these two other things, okay? You need to have the required signage. Yeah, it's that simple. Go get a sign from the TWA or for other organizations like that. Sometimes they give them to you for free. They're super cheap. Or you have a signed agreement. You have a signed Agritourism Act agreement, okay? And what I always say with stuff like this is signs are cheap, agreements are cheap, get them both. Just get them both. Get double covered, get double protected. Let's see. Oh, here are the exceptions. So it doesn't protect you if there's a claim where you disregarded the safety of the agritourism participant, right? Disregarded the safety of that means you have to have been told about it and you said, to heck with that, I don't have time for it, and they get hurt because of it. The Agritourism Act doesn't protect you if you are aware of a dangerous condition on your land, or in a facility on your land, or with equipment being used and you didn't learn about it, okay? That's kind of, if you think about it, you could probably come up with some examples on your own. It doesn't protect you if you didn't train an employee and the employee's negligence caused the injury to the agritourism participant. So think of a hunting guide, okay? Think of a hunting guide that isn't properly trained, that you send out there and ends up causing injury to the participant. All right, you won't be covered under this act. And like I said, it won't cover you if you go run down somebody with your car. You can't intentionally hurt somebody on your property. That one's kind of a no-brainer. Okay, let's talk about this Texas attractive nuisance doctrine. This is an important one that usually gets people, causes them to think. So in a recent Texas Court of Criminal Appeals case from 2021, this case was Curley versus State. The appellate court said that so trespassing kids on your property, these are kids under the age of 16, are treated like they are invitees on your property under the Texas attractive nuisance doctrine. Okay, that is a big deal. Remember, invitee is the highest duty of care that you can owe to somebody. So they are no longer a trespasser if they're a kid. You have to be proactive now about unreasonable risks. And these risks relate specifically to artificial conditions, not to natural conditions. So if you have a creek, a natural creek on your property, you don't have to put up fencing and warning signs around that creek. But what about an oil well pump? Okay. What about a cell phone tower? What about a piece of construction equipment? Anything that might look like a playground, the law is saying that you need to do your part to protect those kids from getting hurt on that stuff, right? And these types of situations are super fact specific. They're gonna look at things like, was a child able to appreciate the danger? Did the landowner know of the artificial condition, or should she or he have known? Okay, if you should have known better, that's gonna be an issue. Were there reasonable safety measures you could have taken but you didn't? Right. So this things like a fence. Did you put a fence around your pump? Okay, stuff like that. So the attractive nuisance doctrine is something else you want to be aware of. So all right. So Eric, you've talked about all this legal stuff. We watched your videos. Tell me what is it that I really need to do? Okay, let's get to that. So the number one thing you can do is get this liability insurance. Okay, this is one of those big box checkers under the Texas recreational use statute, and you should have it anyway. I don't think the policies are very expensive, and you want to have the coverages that are shown here. $500,000 for each person, $1 million for each occurrence of bodily injury, and $100,000 for each occurrence of property damage. The good thing about this too is if you have this liability insurance under the Texas recreational use statute, your damages are capped at these coverage amounts. Okay, that's a double bonus, right? They're capped. So that basically ensures that if someone makes a claim under your policy, that the policy only has to pay out in accordance with your coverage limits. All right, that's a pretty sweet deal. Nothing out of pocket for you. So get that policy. That's the number one thing you can do to help you out with people coming on your property. Homestead. There are the slide says it pretty well. A lot of homestead owners claim less than their full rights. Okay, it's kind of fact specific. If you have an ag evaluation, we want to take a look at that. Plateau Land and Wildlife Management is a great resource for looking at homestead issues. So are we here at Braun and Gresham. Have them take a look. Have them make sure that your leasing, your hunting operation, and your wildlife management and all that is set up in just the right way to maximize your homestead value and coverages. Business entities, okay, stay with me here. Okay, this is important. You might say, I don't need that, Eric. You would be wrong. Okay, let me tell you why. So a business entity is like a fort that you install in front of your capital city. All right, you've got a fortress there, and an attacking army has to make it through the fort first before they can get to your capital city. So let's imagine a scenario where you have a handshake deal with somebody. Say, sure, Larry, you can come on and hunt my property anytime you want. All right, and you just shake hands and go on about your business. Well, Larry falls out of his deer blind, drunk, gets hurt, and sues you. Okay. What assets do you think Larry has access to? What assets? Almost everything. Almost everything. Your homestead protection is going to come up, and that's going to protect you a little bit if you have that. But everything else, your ranch, if it's not covered under your homestead, anything pretty much you've got, it's going to be up for grabs for Larry. With your LLC or your family limited partnership or whatever entity you might set up, as long as that LLC is the party contracting with Larry, Larry can only get the assets of the LLC if he decides to sue. So you put the insurance policy in the LLC, you put whatever assets you need to run the LLC. Those are the only assets that Larry can get to if he gets mad. Why? Because you as an individual have no privity of contract with Larry. You didn't make the deal with Larry, the LLC did. All right. So that's why that's important to have an LLC. You don't have, your personal property and all that is protected. It's all whatever the entity has. Now, a lot of people that are ahead of the curve, what they'll do is they'll set up a couple of LLCs or a few LLCs. They'll have the family business LLC. Then they'll have, let's call the LLC huntersonly.com LLC, okay? And then they'll have huntersonlyleasing.com LLC, all right? And what they'll do is huntersonly.com LLC will hold the assets. There'll be a holding company, okay? So they'll hold whatever assets you need to run your leasing business. Huntersonly.com leasing, or whatever I said, I'm confusing myself now. The leasing side of that will be the property management business. All right, they'll be the party that's contracting with Larry to be able to lease your property for hunting purposes. So now, if Larry gets injured, who does he sue? Right? Who does he sue? He can't sell the family business. He can't sue the family business LLC. There's no privity, right? There's no privity. They didn't contract with Larry, right? He can't sue the holding company where the assets are. They didn't contract with Larry. He's got to sue the leasing entity, okay? That's the only thing he can go after. And guess what, Larry? There's not a whole lot of assets in that leasing company. It's just a leasing company. Sorry, buddy, all right? So that's why setting up entities is so important. There's also, well, if you set them all up separately like that, which setting up entities isn't very expensive, right? It's pretty simple. Come to Braun and Gresham. If you set up those entities, they're all separate. There's going to be tax issues with you paying taxes based on each entity and stuff. There's a new structure called a series LLC, and you may or not be familiar with this, but a series LLC will take all of those. They'll take the family business, they'll take the leasing LLC entity, they'll take the holding entity, and they'll put them all in a line, and they'll say, for formation and tax purposes, we're going to treat you all as one deal. Okay. Super efficient, super easy. When it comes to liability, guess what? You're all separate. All right, it's pretty neat business structure. Kind of difficult to set up, but that's why we're here. So just something to think about. Entities, get them. Okay, here's a big one, right? A hunting lease. All right, this is kind of what we've been building to. Eric, why do I need a hunting lease? All right, the hunting lease sets out the rules, the expectations, and covers your butt. I'm going to do something intentional. And my intentional thing is going to include me reading off of my paper here because this is all part of it. This is all part of it. I want to overwhelm you guys, right? I want to overwhelm you guys with some of the things you may not be thinking about when it comes to a hunting lease. Here's a great example. How long? How long do you want your hunting lease to go for? Right? Is it seasonal? Is it annual? Is it over several years? Where do you want your hunting lease to what are the premises for the hunting lease? Is it your entire ranch? Is it the front half? Is it the back half? Where are you going to give hunters access to? Right? What can be hunted? Is it deer? Is it turkey? Quail? Do you have quail on your property? Hogs? All of it? Only one of those? Right? What game are you going to limit hunters to taking? Which weapons can they use? Right? Do you want bow only? There are some counties that are bow only. Do you realize if you're in one of those counties? What about rifles? What about assault rifles? Okay. If you don't spell this out for folks, they're going to bring whatever they want to. So, so what weapons are you going to allow to use? Are you going to allow dogs on your property? Right? Are you going to allow people to hog dog on your property? What kind of liability issues you think can come from allowing that? What about shooting from vehicles? Are you going to allow that? What about hunting raccoons at night? Are you going to allow night hunts on your property? How many hunters? How many hunters do you need on your land to fit with your wildlife management plan? Do you realize that, right? What if you have too many? Something to think about. What about the order of deer taken? Your protein feeding, right? You've got a couple of prize trophy bucks. Do you want hunters to only take does first? Okay. Do you want them to take call bucks? What are the rules of a call buck? That is super subjective. Okay. If you tell somebody to take a call buck, they're going to shoot 3 or 4 different deer. What is the order of deer that you want taken on your property? What's the price for the lease? Is it going to be based on a season? Is it going to be based per day, per hunter, per animal, per gun? Is it a combo of all of those? What about payments? Do you want the payment up front? Do you want payments made over the course of the year? Are there facilities that hunters have access to? If so, who's responsible for the upkeep of those facilities? What about if the hunters make improvements like land clearing or planting oats or improving roads? Who pays for that? What happens when the lease ends and the hunter comes back and says, hey, I did all this I improved your property. What are you going to do about that? What about blinds? I told you about Larry falls out of his blind, drunk, ensues. Guess what? That actually happened. It actually happened to a client of ours before we represented her. This is for a conservation easement situation that she came to our firm, but this actually happened to a client of ours, and she lost and had to pay this drunk hunter who fell out of his blind $1 million. All right, that's actually a real life situation. So what about blinds? What are you going to do about blinds? Are you going to provide the blinds? Are you going to allow hunters to provide the blinds? What if the hunters want to relocate the blinds? Are you going to be okay with that? Who's going to fill and maintain feeders? Right? What if a feeder is placed on a property line? Did you know that in the state of Texas, the knowing discharge of a firearm over a property line is a Class C misdemeanor? Right? It's kind of important to know that. What about the handling of game animals after they're taken? Is there a particular spot on your property that you only want game animals processed? Okay, that's kind of a big deal. Gates, what are the rules in place around opening and closing gates? Especially if you've got livestock. Who's going to be liable if a gate gets left open and the livestock runs out under a handshake deal? Got a pretty good idea, right? Can the lease be assigned to somebody else? Are you going to allow that? Are you going to be, let's say you lease to your good friend Larry, you've known Larry for 30 years, but Larry leases it to some stranger you've never met before. Are you going to be okay with that? How are you going to protect your rights to hunt if you've leased out the property to somebody else? What about if you have a mineral lease on your property? How is that going to interact with your hunting lease that you're trying to make? What about during the off season, right? Can these hunters have access to your land to sight their rifles, to camp, to fish, right? Can they have, are you going to show up and say, what the heck are you doing here? Right? What about bringing guests onto your property? Okay. How are you going to handle guests coming onto your land? We had a client who contacted us because the person who was leasing, this was a handshake situation. The person who was leasing his property for hunting brought a friend, and the friend got bored and decided to use the property owner's antique car collection for target practice. Okay, under a handshake deal, what do you think the landowner is going to be able to do about that? Not a whole lot. All right. What about kids? Are you going to allow kids on your property? Are they going to be accompanied by a parent at all times? What about disabled kids? Are you going to allow kids with disabilities on your property if they want to come on? What do you think the legal ramifications are of that? What about alcohol? Are you going to allow people to drink on your property? Right. That opens up a whole can of worms. How many of these rules that you might be putting in place do you think people are going to remember if they're drinking? So, all of that stuff is just meant to sort of show you some topics that you might not be thinking about, some things you might not realize, some things that you can't capture through a handshake. And that's why a good lease from an expert who can sit there and look at your property, look at the specifics of your own property, and craft together this document that's particular for you. That's why that's important. That's why it's important that you get something like that. Hunting leases, get one, get a good one. Waivers and liability releases. So this is important too. And this is probably intuitive, but some of it is probably not. So I have a video link, but I'm gonna go ahead and skip that because I know you all were so entertained by my earlier ones. A waiver of liability is only effective if it's drafted well. And a liability waiver is something that needs to accompany the lease, but it needs to be its own separate document. Okay, it's its own contract. You don't want it wrapped up in the lease. You want it to stand on its own. It needs to have its own separate consideration. Right, it's one of those fancy legal terms. Think of the words for $10, another good and valuable consideration. Right, you've probably seen that somewhere. Well, in this case, giving up the right to sue for negligence or an injury in exchange for the ability to hunt is consideration. Okay, it's consideration by both parties. The waiver needs to satisfy the express negligence doctrine, and this basically means that the waiver needs to say in black and white terms, I, Joe Hunter, agree to indemnify and hold harmless Bob landowner from any acts arising from Bob's negligence. So the waiver needs to name the parties. It can't just be some generic thing you download. It's got to have the party names on there and be specific, and it needs to specify the claims that are being released. All right, there are specific things that you need on this waiver, and it's got to be personalized to your situation and set apart from your lease. I should pay attention to my own slides, but there's a great way to sort of sneak a liability waiver in, and that's by using it as an educational opportunity. Right, you can sort of mix in, okay, I'm going to educate you guys on some pointers on gun safety or whatever, hunting safety, and while I'm doing that, please sign this liability waiver. So signs, get one, put it up. You can probably see from this picture, I hope it's clear enough, but these signs and agreements are part of the Agritourism Act that we were talking about earlier. All right, the Agritourism Act. You need signs or agreements. I say get them both. So here's an example of a sign from Texas Farm Bureau. And what's important about this sign is that it has specific language taken from the statute that's got to be on the sign. You can't just put up a warning sign. It's got to be the correct sign under the statute. It's got to look just like that. So find one of those signs, put them up on every entry point on your property. Any point that the hunter is going to see coming into your property or pass by or whatever gate, put one up there. It's got to be visible. All right, you can't put it behind your garage and say, hey, I got my sign up. It's not going to work. So make it where it's visible. Get your agreement. Get your agritourism agreement signed. And this is the third form which we've discussed tonight. You've got your hunting lease, you've got your liability waiver. This is the agritourism agreement. So you're looking at three forms to get completely square with good coverage. And the agritourism agreement also needs to be its own separate contract. Right? You don't want it to be a paragraph in your hunting lease. It needs to be its own separate document, and it's got to be signed before the participant participates in agritourism activity. It's got to be signed by the participant. And it's got to be printed in at least 10-point bold font, right? This kind of stuff matters. This is why just downloading a generic form isn't going to get you there. And it's got to contain the particular language that's taken from the statute. It's got to say something just like this sign, agreement and warning. I understand and acknowledge that an agritourism entity is not liable for any injury to or death of an agritourism participant, right? Basically what this says, it's got to be in the agreement, and that agreement has to be signed by the participant. So get those. That's low hanging fruit. That kind of stuff. The cost of the paper and the time to print that out is nothing. The signs are easy to get, and that gets you. And getting those two things gets you covered by the Agritourism Act, right? That's a big deal. Take time to educate your guests, right? They probably want to know about your property. They probably want to know where you've seen game trails or something like that. And that's a great opportunity to talk to see, hey, what kind of gun are you using? And give pointers. Take time to educate them, and that's a great opportunity to get them to sign some of these agreements. That's a good way to help you out right there. Inspect your property. Or hire, if you have a property manager or something like that, ranch manager, have him or her go out and inspect your property regularly. You have a duty to do that for a lot of the people coming on. Check for those down power lines or something, a tree limb that fell in the road, something like that. Avoid needless accidents that could have been prevented. Emergency protocols. What if there's an accident? Do you know where the nearest hospital is to your ranch? Right. Do you know who you would call? You should know that. What if there's a snake bite? What if there's a snake bite on your property from a copperhead or a rattlesnake? Did you know that not every hospital has antivenom? That only particular hospitals are set up to treat specific snake bites? Do you know where that hospital is, in relation to your ranch? Kind of important information, stuff to consider. And so these are, those are the bricks, right? Those are the bricks. Those are the bricks that create the wall, that offer you the best protection with something that you could take for granted, like somebody coming onto your property and hunting. That could cost you your ranch, right? Those are the bricks that create the wall, and that's what this presentation has really been about. So I hope that you found it valuable. I hope it's been interesting. I thank you for your time and for showing up this evening. If you have any questions at all, I think we're going to open it up to the Q&A. Be gentle. And with that, thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric. I'll remind everybody, if you do have a question, you're welcome to submit those in the Q&A. You'll just need to use the Q&A feature of Zoom on your toolbar. You'll see that option, Q&A. Click that, and it'll actually open up a separate pop-up box, and you can type your questions directly in. I do have one here, Eric. Does land under wildlife management qualify as agricultural for agritourism liability protection?
So that's a great question. So it honestly depends. Under the Agritourism Act, agricultural land is defined a little bit differently than it is from the recreational use statute. So that is, and here's the difference. Under the Agritourism Act, forestry doesn't count. I don't know why. I don't know why the legislature hates trees, but forestry, trees, that doesn't qualify. So if your agricultural exemption is sort of based, and your wildlife special evaluation is sort of based around forestry, then it's not going to apply. But for everything else, that's not really a common ag evaluation for forestry. That's really limited to specific properties and areas. So in most cases, yes, it'll qualify. But remember, there's got to be that agritourism activity, and you've got to have your signs or your agreements under the act to get that protection as well. Great question.
It's the only one I've seen come in just yet. I'll give everybody a few more minutes if maybe they're typing it out here. But I did want to say I have this presentation recorded. And so we'll be sending out an email tomorrow at some time, hopefully before end of day, that will include a copy of this recording. Please feel free to share with your neighbors or with your family members who may have a hunting lease property as well. We also have a series of webinars that we have coming up throughout the rest of this year and into 2023. I can't believe we're already getting close to that. So I'll include a link to the upcoming schedule so you can check back there, and we'd love to have you attend another webinar in our series. I haven't seen any more questions yet. Maybe you have another one come up as you walk away from this. I will include our contact information in that follow-up email, so please feel free to shoot us any questions that way as well. Otherwise, Eric, I think we'll let everybody go. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Eric, thank you for all of this really great information. I learned a lot too.
Good.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Good night.